Now, the deep state, they are in trouble. Now, what's happening here is everything they've done in the past, well, it's all starting to come out. And they're surrounded by facts and the truth. And there's no escape for them. They don't know what to do at this point. And more information is coming out, which is not going to be good for the deep state. And we know when the deep state is pushed into a corner, they come out with their claws. They're going to try to do something. And the only thing they know how to do is, they know how to do two things. One is propaganda in the corporate media, where they make up stuff and they spread it around, and hopefully everyone pays attention to that. The other one is events, where they create false flags to distract from what is really going on. Now, we know that there are certain individuals in the FBI and within the Department of Justice, they are just criminals, and everything that's coming out is pointing to these certain individuals: Rod Rosenstein, Strzok, Page, Comey, Brennan, and the rest, Obama, Clinton, you name it. Now, what's very interesting is that Strzok, as you know, he was testifying in front of Congress, and they were asking him questions, but how do you ask questions if you don't have the meat and potatoes of the Inspector General's report? But what we come to find out is that Strzok, as we know, was the main operative in Operation Crossfire Hurricane. And this, of course, was a deep state plot to run attacks on Trump's team. Now we know that Strzok was really a CIA agent. He only held a ceremonial title in the Bureau, but was really operating under the leadership of the CIA. Strzok has been covertly operating as the section chief of the Central Intelligence Agency's counter-espionage group during his secret 24-year tenure with the agency, while masquerading as Deputy Assistant Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Counterintelligence Division, where he was in charge of investigating Hillary Clinton's use of personal email server, along with the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 United States elections. An unclassified document printed on FBI letterhead dated January 20th, 2016, and if this is real, it contains the subject line, Supplemental Classification Review and Determination, was addressed to the Bureau of National Security's Assistant Secretary Gregory B. Starr from Peter Strzok, who is listed as Section Chief of the Counter-Espionage Section, in reference to Strzok's CIA post. Keep in mind, this is not an FBI post at Strzok's position at the FBI is Deputy Assistant Director, Counterintelligence Division, not Section Chief, which is a CIA post. So there is some type of confusion right now of, was Strzok really a CIA agent put into the FBI to run certain operations according to this document? It seems that way. And if this document is actually real, then he was a plant in the whole thing. Very interesting. Now, we know that Mueller put out the indictments during or right before the summit with Putin, Trump and Putin, and they put out this 30-page long indictment. And it's full of painstaking details about alleged Russian involvement, but it makes numerous assertions that the reader is required to accept on faith because there's little or no evidence provided to back up the claims, and the claims themselves could be false trails set up by any number of hostile intelligence services to implicate Moscow. Now, when we take a closer look at this document, the indictment identifies by name and position the 12 alleged GRU officers who knowingly and intentionally conspired with each other and with persons known and unknown to the grand jury to basically, to manipulate the 2016 election. All 12 alleged GRU officers are described in detail, together with the cover mechanisms they reportedly used and the targets they pursued. But they are all in Russia, and as we know, Russia will not extradite any of these individuals because it's not in their constitution. And there's no chance that there'll be any of these individuals coming to the U.S. unless they go ahead and say, I would like to do this and go to Washington and, stand up for myself. The document itself also provides no information on how the Russian officers and their positions were identified, which suggests that it could have been a U.S. hack or agent in place, either run by CIA or NSA, that came up with the list of those individuals connected to GRU cyber operations. That would be information involving sources and methods, code word protected material beyond top secret. Now, since Mueller really had no case, really didn't have any information on Russian collusion or anyone accessing the elections, they needed a group, and they needed to come up with something of plausible Russians, and they used a generic list provided by either the CIA or NSA to come up with the culprits, and then use those identities and the detailed information regarding them to provide credibility to their account. What they did not do, however, is provide the actual evidence connecting the individuals to the hack interference, or to connect the same to the Russian government. Now, this is how the propaganda always works. Think about when we talked about Assad gassing his own people, where they showed the pictures of the children and the people being gassed. They never made the link on how Assad did this, how he did it, where he did it, and how he got the chemical weapons to do this. They never could do that. The same thing's happening here. They didn't make any type of link to Russia. They just came up with names and said, yes, they did it, and we're supposed to believe them. So what is or is not contained in the document itself, there is a clear misunderstanding regarding how a sophisticated intelligence organization, which certainly includes the GRU, operates. If there had been a large-scale, Russian sanctioned plan to disrupt the U.S. elections, it would not be run by 12 identifiable GRU officers working with what appears to be the only limited cover and resources. If Russia's objective were truly to undermine American democracy, they would not be using computers connected to networks that could be penetrated to enable personal identification or discovery of the ultimate source of the activity. Everyone would be working in alias on standalone machines, and the transmission of information would be done using cutouts to break any chain of custody. A cutout might consist of using thumb drives to transmit information from one computer to another. There would be no sending or receiving of information by channels that would be identified by NSA or CIA and compromise. So the idea that the United States government identified 12 culprits who were responsible for trying to overthrow American democracy is absolutely ridiculous. Again, it's the same thing with the cyber attacks, where they told us that Russia was cyber attacking, North Korea was cyber attacking, and within a couple of hours, they had those individuals. The same thing is happening right now. It's all propaganda. Now, we know that Putin dropped a bombshell, and he was naming William Browder. He was also saying that, listen, those 12 individuals, we will question them in Russia. We will allow Mueller to come over and question them. And what we would like to do is we would like to question Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, for certain crimes and whatnot. And they would like to have Russia come over to here and the U.S. go over to Russia so they can watch the interrogation. And of course, Putin asked Trump for permission to do this, and Trump, of course, was sitting there going, maybe that sounds like a really good idea. Maybe we should do this. Now, it appears that Michael McFaul is getting nervous. He tweeted out, "I hope the White House corrects the record and denounces in categorical terms this ridiculous request from Putin. Not doing so creates moral equivalency between a legitimacy U.S. indictment of Russian intelligence officers and a crazy, completely fabricated story invented by Putin." Now, when we look at this, we see that McFaul is very, very nervous about all of this, and he does not want this to happen. Now, do I think this is going to happen? Absolutely not. And we do get word that the U.S. Senate, in a unanimous vote, opposes Russia questioning. And I don't think Trump is going to go ahead and allow this to happen anyhow, because then it looks like he's working with Putin. This is real Russian collusion, and they're coming after certain individuals. The better solution would be to allow the real evidence that was gathered here in the United States and allow that evidence to be produced along with the Inspector General report about what has been going on, and let other investigations and other indictments move forward without the help of Russia. This way we can leave that out of the picture, and I think that's exactly what is happening right now. And we can see at this point, the deep state was very, very nervous about this, because they knew if this was allowed, it was game over. And this is why these individuals were screaming very loudly not to let this happen. We see the FBI director, Christopher Wray. He's saying that China, rather than Russia, is the most significant long-term threat to the United States. Wray said that the FBI has economic espionage investigations in all 50 states that trace back to the Chinese. That's very interesting, because as we know, there was a server that was not locked down, and there were certain entities taking information. This was a drop site. I mean, back in the old day, you'd sit at a bench, you mark something with chalk on the bench, you leave the item there, someone would come by, pick it up, and they would have the information. Today, it's a lot easier. You don't have to go out of your area. You can have a server right in your home. You can make sure that it doesn't have any encryption, make sure it's not locked down, and allow other foreign entities hack into it with ease and take the information. And then you can say, well, I didn't realize this was happening. It wasn't my fault. I wasn't giving information out. But in reality, that person really was, because they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew they were leaving the server wide open. They knew that other foreign entities were going to hack into it. And of course, they were being paid for it. And you just have to do is follow the money, and you can find how this was done. And of course, what I'm talking about is Clinton's server. Now, remember, Q says they have the server. They have the information. They traced everything. They have it all. Now, Trump has been telling us how great the summit went in Helsinki with Putin. And of course, the corporate media is out there saying that it was a complete and utter disaster. And Trump tweeted that this is all fake news. Fake news media wants so badly to see a major confrontation with Russia, even a confrontation that could lead to war. They are pushing so recklessly hard. And Putin actually backed up Trump, saying that the sit-down was very successful. And they made many different agreements. They didn't elaborate on the agreements, but they said everything went very, very well. And I'm sure it did. It's everything the deep state didn't want to happen. They're even hinting right now of a second summit, and they're going to be talking about North Korea, nuclear proliferation, stopping terrorism, cyber attacks, trade, Ukraine, Middle East, and much, much more. So we see that things are definitely turning around, and the deep state, they do not like this whatsoever. And as the deep state is continually pushed back in the corner and more truth and facts come out, which implicates certain individuals like Comey, Strzok, Page, Clinton, Obama, Brennan, and the rest, they're going to get very, very nervous. And what they're going to do is they're going to push something very large, which is going to be an event. Now, in the beginning, they might have some type of news. They might try to clog the news feed with something ridiculous, maybe like, Stormy Daniels, which they tried to do. It didn't work. But they'll try to do something. Even with the meeting with Putin, they pushed out the 12 indictments to show everyone that, look, Russia is really responsible for this. and that whole thing fell by the wayside. Now, of course, they're still pushing it, trying to convince people, but they're getting to the point where the news that they push out, the propaganda that they push out, no one's really believing it anymore. Now, to really distract from everything, what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to create another event, maybe something on the scale of 9/11, where that takes up the news feed for days and days, actually weeks on end. So what could be next? Well, it could be a cyber attack along with physical events around the country. You know it's going to have to be something very, very large. It could be an economic collapse. And if they blame this on Trump, this would clog the news feeds. People will be very angry. People become very, very angry and pay attention when certain things happen and it hits home, like it hits their wallet, their bank account, their life savings, their way of life. Then people wake up and they pay attention. And this might be something that the deep state does, where they, along with the central bank, they bring down the economy, because everything that we've been hearing and everything that we've been showing is that they have already put everything in motion, where they're getting ready to bring down the system. And if they can do this, this would clog the news feed and people would be very, very angry. Now, if they can control the narrative and blame this on all the policies of Trump, then guess what happens? People become angry. And I think this might be where they're headed now. They could try anything else, and they probably will, but we can see that they're going to move in a direction where they'll have no choice but to have a major, major event. Now we see that Turkey, they've lifted their 2-year-long state of emergency. Turkey has lifted the state of emergency at 1 a.m. local time that has been placed for 2 years since the 2016 failed coup. And we see right now that that is over and done with. We see out in Iraq, the Iraqi army and the Kurdish army, they have joined forces. They're going after the Islamic State now, and they are destroying the Islamic State. We see Syria's Assad. They are set to recover the Golan frontier. And what is happening here is the moderate rebels, the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and the rest of the terrorist groups, they are surrendering or fleeing. And it looks like Assad's forces are moving closer and closer to the border of Israel in the Golan Heights. They have the border controlled with Jordan. They have the border controlled with Iraq. And it looks like the Syrian armed forces, the Russian forces, they have almost full control of the country. And time is now ticking down where the U.S. troops and the coalition forces, they're going to have to do something. And I think it's almost time where we're going to see an announcement that the Iranian advisors are no longer needed in Syria, and we're going to see the U.S. troops, the coalition forces, be removed from Syria. And this will really hit the deep state hard, because as we know, their entire mission was to control the Middle East with regime change and puppet governments in all these different countries. Once they lose this, think about what happens here. They lose Iraq, they lose Lebanon, they lose Libya, they lose Sudan, they lose Afghanistan, they lose Syria. It's game over. The petrodollar system will no longer be supported in these countries. These countries are going to turn to other currencies. This is what they were doing prior to all the invasions going back many, many years. And now we're at the point in time where it's all falling apart. This can no longer be propped up. The system must come down. And it's going to come down because, as we can see, the central bank forces, they are preparing their narrative. They're pushing the economy to crash because they know they have no alternative but to push it to crash, because if they allow it to crash on its own, they won't be able to control the narrative. We have Trump and the Patriots on the other side where they're trying to control the narrative. And then we have the deep state. The deep state, well, they're stuck. And they can either bring down the economy or have some other type of an event, or do both at the same time. But as we can see, the whole thing's starting to fall apart. And even if the central banks don't bring down the economy, it's going to burn and collapse on its own, because as we can see out in the Middle East, it's completely falling apart. The petrodollar is going to be falling apart, and that's what's pretty much holding all of this up, and the whole thing is going to be coming tumbling down. So we can see that we're heading into a period of time where it's going to be very rough, and people are going to struggle,